Extras.
Draven's household. As mentioned, Draven owns his own estate, which he paid for primarily through his own skill and effort, his alchemical research, and creation of magic items. He did get seed money and benefit from the connections from his father-in-law, Baron Silverlode, investments he has repaid, and technically the land still belongs to the Baron until the whole province passes to Draven's wife, Ivana. But it's a mansion that he built with his own effort and talent, which is meaningful to him and to his family. It's part of why Ivana's parents have come to respect him as more than just the holder of a title which will be passed on to their grandchild, his son, Tobin. When he and Ivana moved there, she brought several staff who had been with her since she was a little girl, her handmaidens, but most prominently her head bodyguard, Sir Richard of Pine Creek. Sir Richard is a veteran of the Vistrian army who served in the forces of the Duke of Newland. He had seen action against minor monstrous threats and against the sorts of Diluvian probing attacks which have become much less frequent in the last decade or so, but back then they were a common and bloody affair. During one such attack, a feint by hundreds of scum out of the Crimson Sea along the border between Fortis in Newland and the county of Grey Beach, Richard was serving as a sergeant with the Duke's forces, pursuing the scum as their force split and merged, dodged in and out of hills, setting ambushes in and around rivers and caves, and generally being a pain in the ass. This is a well-known trouble spot, but it persists in being a trouble spot because it's the border between the Duchy of Newland and one of the counties. It's not really a jurisdiction problem, since the Vistrians had learned and sorted that out in the first 50 years after the conquest of Verandi. Troops are clearly and explicitly allowed to move back and forth between the duchy and the county, especially in pursuit of enemy forces. But it remains an undeniable fact that the Duke's forces and the forces of the King's counties coordinate with each other much less well than they coordinate within their own ranks. And so Sergeant Richard's squad charged in to rescue another group of troops who had been decoyed by a group of scum into trying to suppress a group of Diluvians in a river, only to be engaged by the real force from another direction. Richard's men couldn't exactly turn the tide, but they evened the odds enough to force both sides to disengage. Unfortunately, during the battle, Richard took a nasty axe chop to the hand. The blade cut between his fingers, effectively splitting his hand lengthwise. The wound was nasty enough that after the battle, he ordered one of his men to chop the hand off, and they used a blade, heated in the fires of a dead Kuatoa's alchemical flask, to cauterize the bleeding stump. Sergeant Richard was honorably discharged with what is essentially a disability pension, and he tried to make another life for himself for a few years, but while he had never liked combat, certainly not consciously liked it, he nevertheless missed the sense of fellowship he'd had with the men and women he had served with, and in civilian life he felt robbed of any sense of purpose, which was probably exacerbated by the fact that he barely needed to work thanks to his disability money. And so he tried to re-enlist in a couple different places, but found that military recruiters of counts and barons, etc., wouldn't even consider a man who couldn't hold a shield. But one of Baron Silverlode's military staff caught wind of a one-armed ex-sergeant trying to re-enlist, and had a subordinate look into it. They took Richard's honorable service record to the Baron, who snapped him up, certain he could find a use for a man like that. Richard proved an excellent arms trainer, and a very young Ivana, who was initially just fascinated by his missing limb, came to like him a lot, making him a natural choice to lead her personal guard as she grew up. Though Ivana's guard thankfully never suffered any real direct attacks, her father valued Richard's service and experience so much that he knighted him, and When Ivana and Draven moved, he naturally became the head of guard for their entire household. Obviously, Draven wants competent staff, but when he is hiring anyone, he does go out of his way to hire Varandi nationals, his own nationality. The fact is that the majority of people who escaped northward during the Varandi invasion have become stranded in the lowest economic stratum of Vistrian society. The common public perception of Varandi refugees is either one of menial laborers who work for rock-bottom wages, or layabouts collecting handouts in refugee camps. And the fact is, these perceptions are the consequence of generations of landlessness and reduced opportunities, and they mean that few of the former Varandi people are able to break out and move upwards into the middle class. So Draven makes a point of hiring from his people whenever possible and paying them decent normal wages rather than the poverty wages forced on so many of them due to the overabundance of unskilled labor. The other most visible member of Draven and Ivana's staff is Porter. Porter is not his name, and it's not even his job anymore, though that is where he started. But the relatively unassuming South Varandian man had worked his way up through hard work and competence to the point that he's become Ivana's de facto majordomo. He's not officially head of the staff. Draven has a manager who handles his affairs, accounting, etc. in his nearly permanent absence. But Porter is the person who handles the little details, makes sure everything gets done. He's the person the other staff go to when they have a problem. When Ivana goes on a road, he's the one who plans the caravan's route and keeps them on schedule, and who liaisons with the staff of other nobles when required. But although he's become practically a member of the family, the quirky and humble man refuses any upgrade to his job title and insists everyone continue to call him Porter. He just likes it for whatever reason. Though he has accepted every pay raise with little protest. Changing notes here. Kurage. The village of Kurage lay on the uncivilized desert edge of the county of Smith's Rest within the Duchy of Dragurst, named for the Dragurst mountain range. Technically, it was part of Vistria, but the people of Kuraj felt little connection to the kingdom, except as a trading partner and sort of a distant homeland from their past. They were not lawless, but they had their own laws, with no real interference from their supposed lords across the mountains. Essentially, they didn't pay taxes, and received no protection from the kingdom, and everyone seemed to like it better that way. The Dragurst mountain range was high and dangerous, separating the Kurage from so-called civilization. You may have guessed from the county name, it was somewhere in these mountains where the legendary Smith died. They say his body was moved afterwards, but there is a small monument which marks the spot of his passing, and as children neared the age of adulthood, their parents from Kuraj would take them on a pilgrimage to visit that hallowed spot, because although they had grown apart from the society built by Smith's descendants, the people of the desert village admired the heroism and independence of the first king of men. Although everyday life for most of the village centered around the hard work of squeezing food and water from the desert, eating bugs and scorpions, breeding camels and capturing wild ones, setting traps for condensation. The task they most venerated was searching the Uruk desert for ancient artifacts uncovered by the shifting sands. Relics of pre-Shatter War Orcish civilization were not much in demand, but still worth something simply for being over 1,000 years old. The good finds tended to be things lost during the war, emblems and mementos of knights who fell, and treasures looted from Varandi by the orcs back when they had captured the land which they named Gruul. But the real reason the Kurage braved the searing sun, scything winds, and deadly orcs, their holy grail, were treasures left by the ancient Atarans, who were said to have sent caravans all the way through old pre-desert Uruk for some reason. Such finds were of course very rare, but almost anything made by the Atarans could be worth a fortune. Kuraj itself had been founded after the nearby discovery of an ancient text, the Principia Technica, which became one of the foundations of all Vistrian artificing. So, to Vistria, Kuraj was an almost mythical place, far away, shrouded in mystery, passing in and out of knowledge over the course of generations. Some counts of Smith's Rest came and went without ever realizing it lay within their realm, while most holders of that title knew of it, but simply left well enough alone. Some great heroes have arisen from the village, though most of them gravitated more to the northeastern lands of Korostrad, finding more in common with the once nomadic tribes of the tundra than with their farming, city-dwelling brethren in the nearer of the three brother nations. And more than one Kurage wanderer had wandered home with a so-called barbarian husband or bride. But for all the strength of their warriors, it was by stealth and desert craft they survived, in their hidden mountain valley, up a secret path which no orc could ever be allowed to find, not and escape alive. The greatest sacrifice a Kurage could make, the one they steeled themselves for each time they ventured out, was that if followed, if they could not lose their pursuer in the desert, they would never return home, whether it meant fighting a hopeless battle and dying for the village, or wandering the dunes until the winds took them. Zahir's Journey. The Kurage were a small, tight-knit clan of hard men and women. They were strong, stealthy, and independent, and small groups of them ventured into the vast sands of the Uruk Desert, hunting for relics of times long past. Everyone knows Uruk is the land of orcs, but for all their ferocious power, their numbers are tiny, spread over 2.5 million square kilometers of sand dunes and wind-blasted rock plains, though there are thought to be fewer than one orc per 100 by 100 kilometers square. Obviously, they move around. Their own desert craft is without match, and orcs are likely to challenge anyone or anything that seems out of place, particularly if it seems to be strong or elusive. Encounters with orcs had long been the leading cause of death for the people of Kuraj, but the village had survived in a mountain valley on the desert side of the Draghurst mountain range, accessible only by a steep, difficult-to-find rocky path, a large part of that survival due to the relic hunters' extreme care not to be followed, to only approach and enter the path at night or during concealing storms, and their willingness to lay down their lives, leading away any orcs who did find and track them. But this precarious arrangement was not fated to last forever. After existing for centuries in this manner, pride and overconfidence led some Kurage to break one of the ancient rules, venturing into the desert in groups larger than 4. It is hard to say for certain if it was a consequence of 2 or 3 extra bodies out together on the dunes, or simple misfortune that led to their downfall. Zahir would never know. What he remembered was a group of 8 to 10 deadly orcs who stormed the hidden valley. Perhaps his memory exaggerated the horror. He could swear one of them was a monster the size of a house, were no match for so many war blades and sword sages. Zahir snuck and hid and crawled his way to the edge of the village, and when he thought none of the invaders were looking, he slid and tumbled down a dangerous escarpment to escape. As a Kurage, even at this young age, he knew how to find water in the high desert, or at least capture enough morning dew to survive, but food was much more difficult. He stretched what little he had salvaged from the town, but even before it ran out, he was going hungry from the thin rations as he stumbled on, moving northward across the endless sands. From sand to red stone, without a clear objective in mind, he dragged himself on until, when he thought he was about to drop, He saw a light up ahead, and forced himself to keep moving towards it. He had already been suffering from severe starvation, and yet Zahir traveled for 8 more days towards it. He felt there was no strength left in him, but he somehow plodded mindlessly on, beyond pain or hunger, as though there were nothing left of him but a desire to reach that light. The light led him to the northern edge of the desert and beyond, through a low mountain pass, until at the base of the lighthouse he finally collapsed, falling into the arms of a man called Azad. Weeks later, when the boy was able to speak again, he explained how he had followed the light for 8 days, and Azad looked strangely at Zahir for a moment before his eyes softened. "This light cannot be seen from that far away, not even at sea save on the clearest nights, and certainly not through the mountains. But this tower sheds 2 different lights. I think the one you followed was the one meant for the dead." In total, the boy had wandered nearly 300 miles, making it pretty plain that he had some kind of divine aid. In fact, it sounded as though he had crossed into some sort of gray area between life and death. And in the end, he found himself drawn to a lighthouse, which, in addition to warning ships away from the rocks, was also a temple of Anku, as are a handful of other lighthouses throughout the continent. A temple devoted to those who shepherd lost souls and fight, not death itself, but for the sanctity of death and of the soul. And without a home to return to, having heeded the call of that ephemeral light, Zahir began his training to eventually become a powerful priest of Anku. The lighthouse was in fact located near the middle of North Pass, a coastal travel route that Vistria kind of pretends they control, but really they can only minimally protect the caravans they send back and forth. Vistria has established some dangerous farmlands on the other side of Uruk and Korstrad, with the permission of the so-called barbarians who rule the lands of that third of the 3 brother nations. In summer, goods can be shipped back and forth, a dangerous sea voyage, but safer than the pass. For half the year, though, anyone wanting to pass through, basically anyone desperate enough to try and get between Vistria and the rest of the civilized world, has to brave possible orc attacks. Fortunately, most orcs appear to have some kind of respect, or possibly fear, for Anku, because the tower is attacked pretty rarely, far less often than it should be, considering where it is located and how obvious it is. As for Zahir's companion, Mahar, he is more mysterious, though he is clearly bound under some oath to protect Zahir, much as Black is sworn to protect Draven. In game terms, Mahar is an NPC, recruited as a henchman using the powerful leadership feat. The way we treat such henchmen is that the player, in this case Zahir, controls his henchman in combat, but as GM, I roleplay Mahar, and generally control him out of combat. Theoretically, I could take control of him at any time, but I would have to have a damned good reason, and if he left or betrayed the party for reasons beyond Zahir's control, the player would have to be compensated in some other way for his leadership feat. Thanks for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe to my Twitter for my silly D&D house rule of the day, and watch me play and analyze Hearthstone on my Demonac Games channel.